For our next section, we're going to talk about adding and subtracting decimals. And our first topic, we're just going to dive right into adding and subtracting decimals, okay? It's not hard to do. It's a big old breath of fresh air from fractions. Essentially, what we do is we line up the numbers vertically according to the decimal point, add or subtract like you would with whole numbers, and just make sure you drop the decimal down vertically into your answer. Now, this lining up the numbers according to the decimal point is essentially finding a common denominator. Okay. Now, sometimes at this point, you would also add zeros to the end, to the end of the decimal so that you have the same number of decimal places. And that's kind of cool because essentially what we're doing is imagine we have something like zero point 0.7 plus, I don't know, 0.03. Okay, let's just talk fractions. So at this point, we don't have what would be considered a common denominator because this is like 7/10 and this is like 3/100. Okay, but if I were to add a zero right here, okay, we already know from when we were comparing decimals, if I add a zero after the 7, that's like adding a zero here and here. So adding that zero is kind of like multiplying the top and bottom of my fraction by 10. So I've basically created a situation where I now have common denominators, okay? So when I have my zero point 0.7 and I want to add my 0.03, we want to line up the decimal points because technically what we're doing is we're wanting to create a situation where we have common denominators. So this is like a weird parallel to the idea of common denominators. It's just a boatload easier with decimals. So you do want to make sure you line up your decimal points, and then if necessary, you can fill in those filler zeros. That's really equivalent to just finding that common denominator. Okay, it's just so much easier now. So let's go ahead and practice. I think you'll enjoy this quite a bit. All right, so let's start with example one. It says find each sum. So I've got 15.52 plus 2.371. So remember, this is like 15 and 52 hundredths plus 2 and 371 thousandths. Well, we know hundreds and or hundredths and thousandths do not have a common denominator, but that's not a big deal here. We don't have to worry about the whole LCD thing. We just write these numbers vertically by lining up the decimal points. And then if you want to, you can add that filler zero, which is all you have to do to essentially get the idea of common denominators here, okay? Just easier with with decimals than it is with fractions. At this point, the only thing we have to really remember to do is to drop the decimal down into our answer, and then we add just like normal. So 0 plus 1 is 1. 2 plus 7 is 9. 5 plus 3 is 8. We've got our decimal point. 5 plus 2 is 7. And then there's nothing to add to the 1, so I just drop it down. So my final answer is 17.891. Or if we wanted to be real fancy, we would say 17 and 891 thousandths. All right, let's try it again. So we have part B, we have 142 plus 126.095. Well, with the 142, notice there's not a decimal point. So we're like, how do we line up decimal points if we don't have one? Well, if you don't have one, you just put it at the end of the number. So 142 is equal to 142.0 or 0.000 or 000. So we just need to create a situation where if we don't have a decimal, we create one. So we just put the decimal at the end of the number and then tack on a zero. Okay? So we get 142.0. We're going to add to that 126.095, or again, if we want to get fancy, 126 and 95 thousandths. Now, for the sake of being, kind of official here, you can go ahead and add those zeros here and here. Okay, so what that does is it gives us a column for each, or it gives us something to add in each column, basically. All right, well, let's go ahead and start adding. We're going to go from the right to the left. So we have 0 plus 5, 0 plus 9, 0 plus 0. Don't forget to drop your decimal down into the answer. 6 plus 2 is 8, 4 plus 2 is 6, and 1 plus 1 is 2. So this becomes 268 and 95 thousandths when we add. Okay? Now you can add signed numbers just like we did way back when we were talking about integers. So you do need to remember the rules for adding integers. So if you're adding two numbers that have different signs, we secretly subtract and we keep the sign of whatever we had more of. Okay, so we have negative 65.081 plus 39.52. So remember, technically that's negative 65 and 81 thousandths plus 39 and 52 hundredths. Okay, now I'm adding two numbers with different signs, so I want to find the difference between the positive and the negative. So I'm going to take 65.081 and subtract 39.52. We can go ahead and add that filler zero in so we have numbers in each column. All right, so 1 minus 0 is just 1. 8 minus 2 is 6. Unfortunately, I cannot take 5 from 0, so I need to borrow. So I'm going to go to the 5 and 65. I'm going to borrow 1. So the 5 becomes a 4, the 0 a 10. So now 10 minus 5 is 5. Drop down your decimal point. And then 4 minus 9 I can't do. Okay, so I need to borrow again. So the 6 becomes a 5. The 4 becomes a 14. 14 minus 9 I can do. 14 minus 9 is 5. And then finally, 5 minus 3 is 2. Okay? And at this point, you want to just kind of tap the brakes and ask yourself, okay, is my final answer going to be positive or is it going to be negative? Okay? So go back to the original problem. We had a little more than 65 negatives, and then we had only 39 positives. So that means I had more negative than I did positive. So my final answer has to also be negative. Okay? So we get negative 25 and 561 thousandths. So there you have it, okay? And then finally, we've got 80.26 plus 92 plus negative 14.549. Anytime I'm adding a sequence of numbers where there's like more than two, I'll generally add 2 by 2, or I'll add the first two and then drop another one down and keep adding until I'm done. So I'm going to go ahead and add the two numbers that are positive first. So I've got 80.26 plus 92. And remember, if it's not a decimal, we can add a decimal point and a 0, and then it is a decimal. So we're lining up our decimal points. I'm going to go ahead and just add 2 zeros so I have the same number of decimal places. And then I just add column by column. So 6 plus 0 is 6. 2 plus 0 is 2. Drop down your decimal. 0 plus 2 is 2. And then 8 plus 9 is what, 17? So at this point, I have 172 and 26 hundredths plus negative 14.549, or negative 14 and 549 thousandths. Okay, now we're adding two numbers with different signs. And remember, when we're adding numbers that have different signs, we're trying to find the difference in the positive and the negative. So we want to subtract. So I'm going to come down here. I'm going to take 172.26. I'm going to subtract 14.549. And in this situation, adding that filler zero is not an option. You absolutely have to add this filler zero right here. Okay? So now I need to start my subtraction. Well, I need to take 9 from 0, but I can't do that, so I need to borrow. So the 6 becomes a 5. The 0 becomes a 10. So 10 minus 9 I can do. That's just 1. 5 minus 4 I can do. That's just 1. But then I get to 2 minus 5. I can't do that. So I need to borrow again. So the 2 becomes a 1. The other 2 becomes a 12. 12 minus 5 I can do. That's 7. Drop down your decimal. Now, unfortunately, I cannot take 4 from 1, so I've got to borrow again. So 7 becomes a 6, and the 1 becomes an 11. So 11 minus 4 I can do. That's 7. 6 minus 1 is 5. And then this 1 right here, there's nothing to subtract it from. So I'm just going to drop it down. Okay. And then we have to ask ourselves, do I have more positive or do I have more negative? Well, I had over 172 positives and only 14 negatives. So that tells me that positive is going to carry through to my final answer. So my final answer is 157 and 711 thousandths. So there you have it. That's adding decimals, okay? Now let's look at example 2. So example 2 is just subtraction, and I'm going to go ahead and just do it in this video since these are all pretty quick, okay? So find each difference just means subtract, okay? And we've already kind of practiced subtraction when we were adding those numbers that had different signs. So I have 246 minus 78.03. Well, I want to take 246. Ooh, my little tablet just like shifted. I have 246, but I'm going to write it as 246.00, okay? And then from that, I want to subtract 78.03. Now we have to practice this round, or not rounding, borrowing here. I need to take 3 from 0, which I can't do. And then I can't borrow from this 0. So remember, if you have a series of zeros, you need to go to the first non-zero digit to do your borrowing. So we need to borrow 1 from the 6. Well, 6 becomes a 5, and the 0 right beside that becomes a 10. Well, that doesn't really help me out, okay? I still can't take 3 from 0, but now I can borrow from the 10. So 10 becomes 9, and the last 0 finally becomes a 10, okay? So 10 minus 3 is fine. I can do that. That's 7. 9 minus 0 is 9. Drop down your decimal. Now, I cannot take 8 from 5, so I have to borrow. So 4 becomes a 3. 5 becomes 15. So 15 minus 8, I can do. That's 7. I cannot take 7 from 3, so I have to borrow one more time. So 2 becomes a 1, 3 becomes a 13. 13 minus 7 is 6. And then there's nothing to subtract from this 1, so I just drop it down. Okay? So I end up with 167 and 97 hundredths. That's my final answer. Okay? Now, for part B, we have to practice our signs. Now, remember, when we were back in the integers chapter, so chapter 2, okay, we realized that there were some situations with subtracting that were kind of weird. And in this case, I'm subtracting more than what I have. So I only have 60.95, but I need to subtract 87, which is more, okay? So we need to remind ourselves that we can convert subtraction to addition. So if I have A minus B, I can write that as addition by keeping the first integer the same, so a stays the same, but instead of subtracting positive b, I'm going to add the opposite. So I'm going to add negative b, and we're going to do that here. So I'm going to keep 60.95 the same, but instead of subtracting positive 87.031, I'm going to add the opposite of that. So I'm going to add negative 87.031. And we actually practiced this in the previous example. So we want to find the difference between the positive and negative. So I'm going to take 87.031. I'm going to subtract 60.95. We can add a filler 0. So I'm going to subtract just column by column. So 1 minus 0 is 1. I cannot take 5 from 3, and I cannot borrow from 0. So I go to the 7. 7 becomes 6. 0 becomes 10. So now I have something I can borrow from. So I still need to take 5 from 3, so I can borrow from the 10. 10 becomes 9. 3 becomes 13. So 13 minus 5 is what? 8. 9 minus 9 is 0. Drop down your decimal. 6 minus 0 is 6. And finally, 8 minus 6 is 2. So now we have to go back to the addition problem and say, did we have more positive or did we have more negative? Well, I had 60 positives, but I had 87 negatives, so that meant I had more negative than I did positive, so my final answer is going to end up being negative. So we get negative 26 and 81 thousandths. Okay, let's do the same thing for part C and D. We're going to have to convert those to addition. Okay, so for part C, we have negative 10.695 minus 12.27. So let's convert to addition. So I get negative 10.695 plus the opposite of 12.27, which is negative 12.27. And if you're adding numbers that have the same sign, whether both positive or both negative, you add and then you just keep whatever the sign is at the end. So I need to take 10.695 and I need to add 12.27. Let's go ahead and add in a filler 0. Okay, so now I want to add column by column. So 5 plus 0 is 5. 9 plus 7 is what? 16. So I keep a 6, I carry a 1. 6 plus 1 is 7, plus 2 is 9. Drop down your decimal point, and then 0 plus 2 is 2, 1 plus 1 is 2. So I've got 22.965, but remember, both of these numbers were actually negative. So this is negative 22 and 965 thousandths. And that's your final answer. Okay, one more, we have negative 152.3 minus negative 96.58, so we're going to convert to addition. First number stays the same. And then I add the opposite of the second number. Well, the second number is obviously negative. The opposite of that is positive. So I'm going to add positive 96.58. So I'm adding two numbers with different signs. That means I want to find the difference in the positive and the negative. So I take 152.3 and I want to subtract 96.58. When you're subtracting like this and the top number doesn't have the same number of decimal places, you absolutely have to add the filler zero. It's not optional. So we're going to add the filler zero. Okay. So let's see. I cannot take 8 from 0, so I have to start off by borrowing. So 3 becomes 2, and that 0 becomes a 10. Well, 10 minus 8 is 2. Unfortunately, I've got 5 that I need to take away from 2, which I can't do, so I need to borrow again. So 2 becomes 1, and then the other 2 becomes a 12. Well, 12 minus 5 is 7. Drop down my decimal, and I have to borrow again. So you probably hate me at this point because I've made you borrow 67,000 times. So 5 becomes a 4. 1 becomes 11. Well, 11 minus 6 is 5. And I'll be doggone, but I have to borrow again. Or you can think of that 1, 4 is just 14 minus 9. We'll end up getting the same thing, but I'm going to show you the borrowing. So I need to borrow from the 1, which makes it a 0, and the 4 becomes a 15, or the 4 becomes a 14, bless my heart. So either way you slice it, you're going to get 14 minus 9, which is 5. So we've got 55.72, but we have to determine, is it positive or is it negative? So go back to your addition problem. Well, I have negative 152, so I have 152 negatives, but I only had 96 positives. That tells me I have way more negatives. In fact, I have 55.72 more negatives. So my final answer is negative 55 and 72 hundredths. Okay, so that is adding and subtracting decimals. So there's definitely some stuff you have to remember. You have to remember your signs. Okay, that's probably going to be the hardest part here. Honestly, adding and subtracting decimals usually not too bad. Okay.